How's it going, everybody? I'm Sam Lee, reading for writer Leona Melikov, and welcome to Gaming Instincts. The second episode of the ever much anticipated Final Fantasy VII Remake is finally here, after almost 4 years since the release of the first installment back in 2020. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth continues the epic adventure of Cloud, Tifa, Barret, and others on their quest to find Sephiroth. Rebirth introduces players to the open world sections of the remake and gets them acquainted with new characters, gameplay improvements, side quests, and more. So, was the wait and hype worth it? Let's find out. Welcome to our review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The biggest addition to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the open world regions. Many fans were cautiously excited with how Square Enix would be handling the open world portions of FF7 and how they would translate into the modern gaming landscape. I too was one of those people, and I'm going to have to be brutally honest. I was hoping for something a bit more than what Square Enix delivered as far as the open world design is concerned. To put it bluntly, Square Enix seems to have taken a page from Ubisoft's book with a Final Fantasy twist and called it a day. The first open world section of the game is in the Grasslands. This region is visually pretty with a ton of bright and vibrant colors and is fun to run around in. You will be seeking out Remna Wave towers that are guarded by fiends that then can be activated to further survey the open world regions, just like the classic Ubisoft gameplay loop. These towers will help you gain useful intel to activate or discover. Towers are not the only things you'll be looking for, but also fiend battles which act as combat challenges with specific monsters and defeating them under specific conditions. If you're successful, then Chadley, yes, the Chadley from Remake, will give you additional challenges in the combat simulator. Then, there are the summon sanctuaries that you have to look for in order to unlock the ability to take on new summons in Chadley's combat simulator. Defeat them there, and they are unlocked. Finding more sanctuaries of the same summon will make the battle easier. There are also life springs that teach you about the region's flora and fauna. Then there are the chocobo assignments, where you're required to tame a chocobo in order to ride it and explore the region at a much faster speed. Every region has a unique chocobo with their own traversal abilities. Some may scale up flat walls, others may jump big distances by hopping on giant mushrooms. Oh, and one more thing, chocobos are not the only way to travel in such big regions, but we'll save that secret for when you guys start playing yourselves. You are not required to do any of this stuff and can opt to completely skip over them and just progress to the main storyline, but do so at your own peril. Not exploring the open world may make future boss battles much more difficult than they need to be, and your characters also might not be as powerful because you did not explore, losing out on the EXP that comes with exploring and fighting in the overworld. On top of that, exploring the open world is an excellent way to experiment with a variety of different party setups and materia, as well as leveling the materia itself. Doing so will unlock powerful summons that can be extremely useful later down the line. Last but not least, there is the phenomenon intel, which is probably the most engaging and interesting aspect of the open world sections. This type of intel usually leads to mini-narratives that involve some past characters that you might have met in the previous game. These discoveries usually end up being multi-part quests that may involve some sort of puzzle, stealth, or particular combat scenarios. They are also a lot more lighthearted and tend to be goofy. Think of these as fun side activities that offer a reprieve from the main questline, each with their own rewards. Though I did start this section by comparing what Square Enix did in this game to Ubisoft's slop, in all honesty, it isn't that bad. It's worth noting that the open world map does not get bloated like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or any of the other Assassin's Creed titles. So if you are worried about open world clutter, do not fear because there is very little of it here. Overall, I wasn't sure what to expect out of the open world areas. Honestly, if I was in Square Enix's shoes, I'd be pretty terrified trying to figure out how to blend FF7 with modern open world design. Some may find activating towers a lazy attempt at open world mechanics, while others will simply go with the flow and enjoy exploring every nook and cranny to their heart's content. And of course, there will be those who just skip it all together and just bum rush to the end to just, well, see the end. The reality is, no matter what Square Enix would have done with the open world regions in Rebirth, someone was going to be dissatisfied. Personally though, I believe that it gets the job done for the most part, but there's a lot of room for improvement. The exploration can be fun and is engaging at times, but when you get to the next few regions, it starts to feel like a chore. They could have done something different in the place of towers when it comes to discovering more of the land or interest points. Maybe it was the easiest thing to implement to accelerate development time and meet deadlines, but like I said, all the side content is optional. Though encouraged, you are not forced. The open world sections offers you the freedom to pace yourself and your playthrough to your liking. If you played Remake back in 2020, then you will be treading familiar waters with Rebirth's combat system. For the most part, it's pretty much identical. You still have your regular ATB system, enemy pressure and staggered states, and you can still block and parry as usual. You are able to switch to different characters on the fly and can only have a total of 3 party members during a combat scenario. You can only swap out party members when you're out of combat. However, there will be moments where you will be stuck with certain specific characters due to where you are in the story, but those events are only in very certain sections of the game and do not happen very often. My favorite part about the combat is trying to figure out the boss fights though. What works? What doesn't? Once that's figured out, your next step is to craft the party and materia setup for the battles that lie ahead. If you fail the boss fight, you can always retry and go with a completely different strategy with different party members, materia, and summons. The combat system is simple and easy to jump into, but gets more in-depth and rewarding the further and deeper you take it. In terms of difficulty, Rebirth offers story and normal mode. Story mode makes combat trivial. It's purely there for players who are along for the ride for the story more than the fighting. Normal mode is how the developers intended the game to be experienced. It's not too hard, but it's not a cakewalk either, giving you a good balance of difficulty. I played the game via normal mode and was quite satisfied with how everything felt. As previously mentioned, the open world sections of the game do kind of tie into the core combat. By doing open world activities, you can discover new materia, level up your current materia, participate in combat challenges under certain conditions, discover and unlock new summons, and find new gear as well for your party members. The open world is where the new elements come into play if you were to compare the primary differences between Remake and Rebirth. Other than that, it felt pretty much identical. There is also another new system that complements the character progression, the Folio system. It reminds me a bit of the sphere grid system from Final Fantasy X. As you play and level up your characters through combat, you unlock SP, or skill points, and can use these to choose new abilities or flat stat increases for each of your party members. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it does add another element of customization. The best part about it is that it allows you to spec into new synergy abilities, and those are a ton of fun to use. As far as the core gameplay goes, the loop is very simple. You go from area to area, watch a ton of story cutscenes, proceed to fight something, then finally maybe get to a new open world section with even more cutscenes. Add visiting a town or two, rinse and repeat, and that's Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in a nutshell. In Remake, you are mostly going from one linear area to another with cutscenes and battles in between. Rebirth simply adds the open world regions in between, where you're free to do what you want at your own pace. Now, one really cool aspect about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the addition of a bunch of new minigames. There's a lot of cool side stuff now, and one of them is a brand new card minigame called Queen's Blood. If you've ever played The Witcher 3's Gwent card game, then you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. Throughout your journey, you will come across NPCs that offer you to challenge them in a game of Queen's Blood. Queen's Blood at first was a bit confusing, but after about challenging 3 to 5 opponents, I got the hang of it, and it was a ton of fun. Basically, the objective is to earn more points than your opponent, and you do that by placing cards on the board. Each card may require a certain amount of pins on the player's side of the board in order to be played. Basically, you want to play it in such a way where you can block your opponents from placing any more cards on any of the 3 possible rows. As you beat more and more opponents, you get more and more cards that you can later use to build new decks. You can also buy card boosters from certain NPCs as well, so make sure you explore each and every town you end up visiting. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but it was worth mentioning because I had a lot of fun with it, and I highly suggest you give it a shot. There are other minigames that also caught me by surprise, but I won't mention what they are to save the surprise. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is best experienced when you have as little information about it as possible. It's now time that we talk about the visuals and overall performance of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but considering that we are now almost 4 years into the PS5 and Xbox Series X's console lifecycle, I was expecting a bit more when it came to the game's technical performance. For the most part, Rebirth looks pretty much identical to Final Fantasy VII Remake as far as the art style and direction goes, and that is a very good thing because you want to keep everything consistent throughout. However, there are going to be quite a lot of times when you just look around the environment and go, what the hell am I looking at? And then proceed to say something like, why does this texture look like a blurry, hot mess? Look, I wasn't expecting insane, crazy, next-gen, drop-dead gorgeous visuals or anything like that, but I wasn't expecting ancient-looking, flat textures either. I believe that Square Enix kind of put themselves into a tight spot with the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. Unreal Engine 4 was fantastic during the PS4 era. However, with Rebirth going into the open world, a more capable machine was needed, which is where the PS5 comes into play. If the open world sections did not exist, the game would still be easily playable on the PS4. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth simply just looks like a cross-gen title, which is very sad to say. A PS5 Pro console and a PC version of the game needs to hurry up, because the performance in Rebirth is not a good one, and here's why. There are two graphical modes, including performance and graphics as they are called in the game's menu. The graphics mode goes for 4K resolution, but with poor FPS that can barely coast at 30 and probably drops even lower, especially during open world and big boss battles that have a ton of effects going on the screen all at the same time. Due to the poor frame rates, boss fights become a bit of a hassle, considering how much is going on the screen. Everything starts to kind of blur together, and trying to time a perfect parry with such paltry FPS will be no easy task. Yeah, everything will look pretty, but it'll put the game into a not so fun to play state. I played and finished the game using performance mode, which thankfully was locked at 60 for a majority of the time. However, there is a massive drop in the game's resolution, and you can very clearly see the blurriness and the already bad looking textures, and even characters themselves kind of start to look a tad bit uncanny. But thankfully, the game's gripping story, fun combat system, and its open world regions kept me going from start to finish. With that being said, I am a bit concerned about what will happen to the third part of the trilogy if it's utilizing Unreal Engine 4 again, considering it is supposedly coming sometime in 2028. I'm hoping that, by then, Square Enix decides to switch to Unreal Engine 5 and plugs the previous two entries into Unreal 5 as well. The one very good thing about Unreal Engine 5 is that it's very easy to transfer over your already made game and assets from Unreal Engine 4. By 2028, the PS6 should be out, and I am deeply hoping for a complete edition of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, all running on UE5. That will truly be the ultimate way to play the entire remake from start to finish. But perhaps that's just wishful thinking. In summation, the game's art direction and style is good, and I'm happy with it, but I was hoping that the performance would be a bit better, considering that this is a PS5 title only. Not releasing this game simultaneously on PC is a huge mistake, in my humble opinion. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth picks up right after the end of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. We're not going to be talking about any story spoilers here, but if you've played the demo of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, then you already know exactly how the second part begins. As a fan of the original though, I just wanted to say that Square Enix did an amazing job at recreating the crazy twists that happened throughout. On top of that, they have also managed to tell parts of the story that they had not been able to before with the original game back in 1997. Some may say that it's not a true one-to-one remake when it comes to the story aspect, but I would respectfully disagree with that opinion and believe that adding additional context and story bits that didn't exist before is a good thing rather than a bad thing. But just like anything in life, it is not possible to make everyone happy. Regardless though, I sincerely believe that what Square Enix has done here story-wise will leave the majority of the old school fans more than pleased. I think the biggest strengths that Rebirth has when it comes to the lore are its characters and their background stories. Each and every character in Final Fantasy VII is memorable in their own right for different reasons. For me, personally, I find Tifa and Barret the most entertaining. If you loved them in the original game and the first part of the remake, then you'll continue to love them even more in this one. The new cutscenes are also a ton of fun to watch and gives you a whole new perspective that you've never been able to experience before due to much weaker technology at the time. It's hard to continue to talk about the game's storyline without spoiling it, so I will just simply reiterate that I believe that fans will be very pleased. Thanks to modern technology, Square is now able to tell the story they originally intended to. Whether you're new to Final Fantasy VII or a longtime fan, then you're in for a big treat. I had a ton of fun with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as far as the story, characters, cutscenes, and the core combat goes. I think most fans will as well. If you're hoping to relive the awesome moments of the epic storyline once again that utilizes modern technology, then your wish has been granted. However, if you're looking for a completely flawless experience with amazing visual fidelity and incredible open world gameplay, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth won't fit the bill. The core objective of this remake was to hit hard on the nostalgia, and it 100% achieves that. However, some of the open world design choices that are a bit similar to Ubisoft and the technical flaws kind of put a damper on the overall experience. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a game that is coming out of the last era of gaming, and you could tell it's not really utilizing current-gen hardware to its fullest potential, and that is very unfortunate. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth could have been a complete masterpiece if it was not held back by its technical problems. Despite those complaints though, there's still a great game underneath the hood, and I believe that every Final Fantasy VII fan should play it and enjoy it. There's a great tale to be experienced here. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will be receiving a final verdict score of 8.5 out of 10. And this concludes Gaming Instinct's review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. To see more reviews and content like this in the future, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, this has been Sam Lee, and until next time.